Welcome back. I want to start off by saying that in my last video, the introduction video, I did mention that I was going to talk about how I was able to raise 3 adults and share my experiences. I would like to put a disclaimer out there that it's not that I know everything, and it's not because of what I knew at that time, but because of the grace of God. I honestly know and believe that God gave me some tools to use with raising my children, and that's how I got to this point. And I would also say that it was not that I got everything right. I did mention that in the last video. So in continuation, I grew up on the campus of University of Ife. My dad was a college professor, my mom a high school teacher. And because my dad was a professor, he traveled a lot. He actually was in the US for his master's and PhD when they had me while they were in the US. And they went back to Nigeria in 1968, and they lived in Ife at the time. I wanted to talk about the way we were raised. Because my dad traveled a lot, he was exposed. We were not raised in your traditional Nigerian home where a child was only supposed to be seen and not heard. We were heard. We were involved in conversations in the house. And I remember when I met my husband, well, not when I met him, along the way, over the years in our marriage, some of the things that would happen, and he'll be surprised at the way I reacted. He'll be like, and you were raised in Nigeria, because he was raised in the US. He was born in Nigeria, but raised in the US. And he could not be seen. He was not seen. He was not heard. I meant to say he was only seen. So anyway, when I immigrated to the US, I lived in Chicago. I met my husband a week after I got to the US. And we went to CAC, a Nigerian church. I stayed with my auntie in Chicago at the time. And the things that I saw in that church and the experiences I had in Nigeria kind of helped me put together the way in my mind that I thought God gave me some ideas. I'm like, I don't want to raise my children this way. And it gave me the perspective of what I wanted to keep in the Nigerian culture and what I wanted to keep in the American culture, because I quickly realized that the American culture could really ruin your destiny if you were not careful. America is a free-for-all. You could do whatever, There are no really hard rules about life in America, as opposed to being in Nigeria, where if your parents say don't do this, you didn't have to do it, or you don't do it, in my era at least. And being in Chicago, also, I realized that a lot of the Nigerians that I met along the way, they were raising their children the American way, and I saw the negatives of those factors. So like I said, before I got married, in my mind, I'm like, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. I also, in this conversation, want to give a shout out to my auntie that I lived with in Chicago, because I did learn some valuable things when I was with her. She was the one that would always say, translated to an inanimate object cannot be wiser than somebody that has feelings and can think. So because she had 2 young children, 2 young beautiful ladies at the time, or young girls at the time that blossomed to beautiful ladies now, that I remember one day they were involved in a fight, and she tried to talk to them, and they were both being like, they didn't want to listen. So when she used to be in the military, she got on the phone and she acted like she had talked to people on the phone. They were in grade school at the time. I would not forget. They both cried because she told them she was shipping them to the military. I mean, after that day, I realized that they reorganized themselves. How do we put it in Nigeria? Their brain was reset. So I saw that, and I picked up on that. And one other thing that I learned from her that became an integral part of my life is the art of being able to save, not spend what you have, because America is a credit card society, is a cashless society. It's a society where what you don't have, you can get it and use your paycheck from 10 years from now to pay for it today. So I learned those lessons because amongst a lot of people that were in Chicago at the time, she was one of the ones that had bought a house. A lot of people were in apartments and what have you. So I learned those 2 valuable lessons from her. So anyway, moving on, with raising kids, when my husband and I got married, we decided that we wanted our children to learn our native language, which is Yoruba. We're Yorubas. So what we did was, we said, when we had my oldest, we started speaking to her in Yoruba. She was about 1.5 years and she wasn't talking. So we went to the pediatrician and she went to a babysitter at the time, an in-home babysitter, and the lady babysitter of course spoke English to her. We spoke Yoruba, and the pediatrician said the reason why she wasn't talking yet was because she was confused. Us speaking Yoruba to her and the babysitter speaking English. So we stopped speaking Yoruba to her. That was a big mistake. And right away, almost immediately, she started talking. So we were like, okay, she was confused, that's true. But we still spoke to her, we would speak to one another in our language, we would speak to her in our language, but it wasn't like specifically 100% we spoke that language. And what I learned from that is the fact that as an adult now, she was like, I wish you would have spoken more Yoruba to me. Now our children are like interested in the language, which, that was one decision that we made at the time that I wish we didn't go back on speaking the language. And then there was a Yoruba book that my parents-in-law used for my husband. Also, I want to shout out to my parents-in-law. Even though they raised my husband in America, he came from Nigeria. He speaks fluent Yoruba. They didn't take that Yoruba away from him, and he left Akure when he was age 5. So that book that they used for him, we used for my children. I would read the Bolanki ya babanki, Bolanki baba ekaros ekaroma. So early on in raising kids, that was what we did. When the children wake up in the morning, they speak. That's how they greet us. They kneel down. We have 3 girls. They kneel down, and it's ekaroma, ekarosa. So today we talked about the initial stages of raising kids. As we continue on, we'll talk more in depth about the real challenges and how God helped us through those challenges. Thank you for watching. Come along next week.